Hello, and welcome to my latest episode of True Crime Character Design. In this episode, I work on a character design based on Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker. I realize he's already been talked about and even made an appearance as a fictionalized version of him on American Horror Story, Hotel, and American Horror Story 1984. I'm also familiar with another fictionalized version of Richard through a slightly infamous fan artist that I used to watch back in 2013 known as Macalo that drew a fictionalized version of the person. Wanted to do something similar with my design, but when I first drew Richard, I went the American Horror Story route, combining fiction with reality, but I didn't like how he was looking. He felt bland and not fully developed design-wise. I realize I'm being ridiculous with my approach, so I used Seventh Sanctum to help me come up with a better solution that fits what I'm looking for and suits the Night Stalker, which the description reads, "This sneaky magic knight has slanted brown eyes and shoulder-length, curly, luxurious, brown, purple hair, worn in a simple style. He has a graceful build. He has darkness powers focused through a series of orbs. His costume is black and red, looks like a fusion of a mysterious emperor's formal wear and a businessman's suit, and it looks to be carved from darkness itself. I know I'm making this design more fantastical, and it might be risky for me to do, because I'm somehow painting, haha, puns. This guy is cool, and it may not win me any favors." I'm not the only one that creates fictionalized versions of real-life monsters, and I certainly won't be the last. Here is 1984, long before I was born. My mom was 7 years old, if I did the math right. Grandma was being the original dance mom way before the TLC show made airwaves, and Granddad was working his ass off at the steel mill, making a living for his family at the time. Thankfully, my family was nowhere near the hunting grounds of the Night Stalker. They were safely in Ohio. Unfortunately, I can't say the same for those in the greater Los Angeles and San Francisco Bay Area in California that fell victim to his reign of terror and had the misfortune of being paid a visit from a stalking evil that terrorized the night, wanting to fulfill his desire to cause pain and misery to anyone waking up to see him creeping into their bedrooms. The modern-day internet users see a reference to the Bed Intruder song from years ago, and it's weirdly apt here due to the nature of how the Night Stalker operates. I realize making jokes would either help or hinder things I say about the subjects of the speedpaint videos that I create. My approach to these criminals vary. Richard Ramirez was born on February 29th, 1960, in El Paso, Texas. He came into a world of pain due to the abuse and a head injury that he had endured. He was born to Mexican immigrants, Mercedes Munoz and Julian Tapia, and he was the youngest of 5 children. Unsurprisingly, Julian was an abusive piece of shit that harmed his children and was prone to violent outbursts, and like Peter Curtin's father in the last video, Julian attacks his wife and children. Ramirez was brought up Catholic and began smoking marijuana and drinking alcohol at the age of 10. I bet Richard Nixon would have made an example of Ramirez with his stupid anti-drug campaigns. I mean, the timelines match up somehow. Psychiatrist Michael Stone describes Ramirez as a made psychopath, as opposed to a born psychopath. He said that Richard's schizoid personality disorder contributed to his indifference to the suffering he caused his victims, and his untreatability of his symptoms. Stone also mentioned that Ramirez was knocked unconscious and almost died multiple times before he was 6 years old, and as a result later developed temporal lobal epilepsy, aggressivity, and hypersexuality. Since we all know how useful either of Richard's parents were, read not useful, was taken under the wing of his older cousin, Miguel Angel Mike Velez. He was born June 14th, 1949, died April 8th, 1995. A soldier in the U.S. Army that feeds the darkness within Richard because Miguel was also a murderous piece of crap that also essayed innocent Vietnamese women during his service in the Vietnam War. Mike took Polaroids of these acts and he shares them with a young Richard. And rather than showing disgust, horror, and calling the police like a normal person, Ramirez was fascinated by these Polaroids and stories cousin Mike told him. Many of these stories depicted these poor women being ruthlessly tortured in gruesome ways that the valets had done. Mike shows Richard some military skills, including stealth and kill tactics. Around this time, Ramirez sought solace from his father's violent temper by sleeping in a local cemetery and spending time with his older cousin. Shortly after Ramirez had turned 14 in 1974, he began using LSD frequently. He and his cousin Mike resumed bonding over their shared use of drugs and booze. It was during that time Richard begins to develop an interest in Satanism and the occult. As Richard grew, he began to have fantasies involving forced bondage, graphic violence, murder, mutilation, and SA. While still attending school, Richard worked at his local Holiday Inn and took advantage of his position, using his master key to rob sleeping patrons. On at least one occasion, Ramirez touched 2 children in an inappropriate way in an elevator at the hotel, but he never got in trouble for this act. He lost his job after he attempted to SA a woman in her hotel and was caught in the act by the victim's husband. Ramirez had the crap beaten out of him by the victim's husband. They lived out of state and they declined to return to Texas to testify against Richard. On May 4th, 1975, Richard's idol and his cousin, Mike, fatally shot his second wife, 26-year-old Jessie, in the face with a handgun during a domestic dispute. Richard was present during this attack, and he watched the scene unfold with fascination rather than horror. However, despite Richard's fascination with the death of his cousin's spouse, Ramirez still withdrew from his family and peers. Mike was found not guilty for reasons of insanity. The shooting was caused by PTSD from Mike's military service during Nam. After his elder cousin murdered his second wife, Ramirez dropped out of high school in the 9th grade in 1975. Shortly after the shooting, Ramirez moved in with his eldest sister, Ruth, and her peeping Tom husband, Roberto. Roberto takes Richard along with him for his nocturnal exploits of watching unsuspecting women. Cousin Mike was released from the loony bin in 1977, the year my mom was born. Neato. Mike joins Richard and Roberto in the peeping. It's like Ed, Edd, and Eddy, only I'm not sure which is which, and these creeps have less charm than the Eds, and a hell of a lot more terrifying in their exploits. At least the end goal for the Eds was jawbreakers. Richard, Roberto, and Mike's goal was voyeuristic walks and spying on women through their windows when they weren't noticing them. Terrible pop culture joke involving a late 90s cartoon aside, Richard did not have great role models. That much is clear as day. 5 years later, Richard moved to and settled permanently in California. It was around that time that he picked up his cocaine habit and began burglarizing homes to support his drug habits. Richard was a nomad traveling around California. He moved between San Francisco and Los Angeles County, causing mayhem wherever he went. On June 28, 1984, Richard breaks into the apartment of 79-year-old Jenny Vincow, murdered her, and stole Jenny's belongings to fuel his cocaine habit and pay for his rent. 9 months later, after Jenny's murder, Richard strikes again. On March 17, 1985, he attacks 22-year-old Maria Hernandez outside of her home in Rosemead, shooting Maria in the head with a .22 caliber handgun after she pulled into her garage. She survived when the bullets ricocheted off the keys she held as she lifted them to protect herself. She played dead whilst Richard looked for any witnesses. In the house, Maria's roommate, 34-year-old Dale Yoshi Okazaki, heard the gunshots and ducked behind a counter. When she raised her head to get a look at what happened, Ramirez waited for Okazaki to peek over the counter and shot her in the forehead, killing her instantly. Within an hour of the Rosemead attack, Ramirez shoots 30-year-old Veronica Yu twice and flees the scene. Veronica was sent to the hospital where she dies. The two murders and an attempted third in a single day attracted extensive coverage from news media, who dubbed the attacker as a curly-haired, bulging eyes with rotting teeth. I mean, look at the photos of Richard. Dude needed dental work really bad. Cocaine really jacks up one's teeth. Good God. They dubbed him the walk-in killer and the Valley Intruder. 1 week later, at around 2 a.m. on March 27, 1984, Ramirez breaks into a home he burglarized a year earlier, just outside Whittier, and killed 64-year-old Vincent Charles Zazzara in his sleep with a bullet to the head. Zazzara's wife, Maxine, age 44, was woke up by the gunshot. Ramirez beat Maxine and bound her hands, while he demanded where the Zazzara's valuables were. As Richard ransacked the bedroom in search of said valuables, Maxine managed to escape her bonds, grabbed for the shotgun that was hidden underneath the bed. Unfortunately for Maxine, the gun was not loaded when she tried to shoot Ramirez. Angrily, in response, Richard shot Maxine 3 times, found the things he was looking for, and left a parting gift for law enforcement in the form of cutting an inverted cross on Maxine's chest, removed her eyes, and placed them in a jewelry box that he took with him. Richard attempted to perform necrophilia on Maxine's body, but he couldn't get it up, due to the feeling of being so shook up from the events. He took the jewelry box with Maxine's eyes to his apartment, and it stayed there until his arrest. Ramirez left footprints from a pair of Avia sneakers in the flower beds, which police photographed and also had a cast for them. Bullets were also matched those that were found in the previous attacks that Richard was a part of. Police determined they had a serial killer at large. 2 weeks later, on May 29th, Ramirez drove a stolen car to Monrovia and stopped at the house of Mabel Ma Bell, age 83, and her disabled sister, 81-year-old Florence Nettie Lang. Finding a hammer in the kitchen, he bludgeoned and bound Lang in her bedroom, then bound Bell. He bludgeoned Mabel before using an electrical cord to shock both of the women. He essayed Nettie. He used Mabel's lipstick to draw the satanic pentagram symbols on her thighs, as well as on the walls of both bedrooms. The women were found 2 days later, alive but comatose and critically injured. Mabel died in the hospital due to her injuries, and later Lang died in August. The next day, Ramirez drove the same stolen vehicle to Burbank and snuck into the home of 42-year-old Carol Kyle. He bound Kyle and her 11-year-old son with handcuffs before ransacking the house. He freed Carol to direct him to her family's valuables, essayed Carol repeatedly, told her not to look at him or he'd cut out her eyes. He fled the scene after retrieving Carol's son from the closet. He bound him in, and Carol was bound with her son yet again. Ramirez's vehicle went on a bloody rampage randomly to 75-year-old widowed grandma Mary Louise Cannon. Richard quietly entered into the old lady's house, bludgeoned her into unconsciousness, and stabbed Mary multiple times with a butcher knife until she dies. On July 7th, Ramirez burglarized another home of 60-year-old Joyce Lucille Nelson in Monterey Park. Richard found the woman asleep on her living room couch. He beat her to death by stomping on her face repeatedly. He left Joyce, her face caved in, and Ramirez went to another house that night. He chose the home of Sophie Dickman, age 63. He assaulted and bound Sophie, attempted to R-word Sophie, and stole her jewelry. When she swore to him that he had taken everything of value, he demanded Sophie.
Swear to Satan.
On August 8th, 1985, Ramirez drove a stolen car to the Diamond Bar and chose the home of Sakina Abawath, age 27, and her husband, Elias Abawath, age 31. Around 2:30 in the morning, Richard came into the master bedroom. He shot and killed Elias with his .25 caliber handgun. He then handcuffed and beat Sakina, demanding where the family's valuables are. And then he brutally essayed her. He repeatedly demanded she swear on Satan that she would not scream during the assault. Sakina and Elias's 3-year-old son woke up, entered into the bedroom. Ramirez ties the little boy up and continues attacking Sakina. He left her and her son. She freed her baby, and he had him get help from the neighbors. Ramirez kept an eye on the news coverage of his crimes, left Los Angeles, and headed to San Francisco. On August 18th, he entered the home of Peter and Barbara Pan. He shot and killed Peter, beat and essayed Barbara before also shooting her in the head. Richard left a message to law enforcement, another pentagram on the nearby wall, and a phrase, "Jack the Knife." He left a dirty shoe print on the scene that matched a specific pair of Avia sneakers. The press leaked information, much to the detective's chagrin, because that gave Richard an opportunity to destroy crucial forensic evidence, pointing at him as the perpetrator of these crimes, since he was keeping an eye on the news coverage. Richard threw his Avia sneakers off the Golden Gate Bridge. He remained in the area for a few more days before heading back to the Los Angeles area. On August 24th, 1985, Ramirez traveled south to LA in a stolen orange Toyota to Mission Viejo. That night, he arrived at the home of 45-year-old James Romero Jr., who had returned from a family vacation to the Rosarito Beach in Mexico. Romero's son, 13-year-old James Romero III, happened to be awake. While his family was asleep, James went outside of his house to retrieve a pillow that was forgotten in a truck, which was locked. When he was outside, he heard a rustling sound. Assuming it was an animal, James went to investigate, but did not notice anything out of the ordinary. James went into the garage and began working on his mini bike before hearing Ramirez's footsteps outside of the house. James, being the smart kid he was, saw the license plate number of Ramirez's car. Romero contacted the police with the information, believing James had chased away a thief. When Richard couldn't attack the Romeros, he decided to go to another house, and this one was the house of 30-year-old Bill Carnes and his 29-year-old fiancée, Inez Erickson. Through a backdoor window that Richard broke into, Ramirez entered the sleeping couple's bedroom and woke Carnes up when he cocked his gun. He shot Bill 3 times and turned his attention towards Inez. He identified himself as the Night Stalker and forced her to swear that she loved Satan as he beat her with his fists and bound her with neckties from the closet. He stole what he could find, dragged Inez into another room to essay her. He demanded cash and jewelry and made her swear on Satan that there was no more. Richard left her home. He said one last thing to Inez before he absconded.
Tell them the Night Stalker was here.
Richard had other attempts on lives of innocent people. He also had suspected victims that were in his roster. These were admitted during Richard's time in prison. Thankfully, Inez was able to give a detailed description of hers and her fiancé's assailant. Also, by the way, I forgot to mention that her fiancé Bill managed to survive the attack. The police found Ramirez's abandoned Toyota and that he stole in Koreatown, LA. They collected fingerprints that matched Richard's, and Richard had quite the rap sheet when he lived in Texas. Law enforcement decided to release Ramirez's mugshot from a 1984 auto theft to the media. At a press conference, it was announced,
"We know who you are now, and soon everyone else will. There will be no place for you to hide."
On August 30th, 1985, Ramirez took the bus to Tucson, Arizona to visit his brother. He wasn't aware that he's become the lead story in every major newspaper and television news program across California. After failing to meet his brother due to his brother not being home, Richard came back to Los Angeles. He noticed police officers were looking for him around the bus station and attempted to flee on an outbound bus. Richard noticed a group of elderly Hispanic women fearfully identify him as El Matador. He saw his face on the front page of La Opinion with a headline calling him Invasor Nocturno. English, it is a night invader. And Richard ran in a panic away from, well, I guess everybody. After running across the Santa Ana freeway, he attempted to carjack an unlocked Ford Mustang, but he was ripped out of the car by angry residents. The residents kept him in place, beat him up, and waited for police to arrive and finally caught the Night Stalker. I've obtained this information from Richard's Wikipedia article. I found him darkly fascinating, but I'm not like Ramirez's fangirls that find him hot for some reason. Nor am I like the lady Doreen Leoy, who wrote Richard letters of adoration and love. Don't get me wrong, I've always found punk guys attractive myself, and would have also found Ramirez attractive back in the day. I'm not gonna lie. It's just that the teeth look atrocious. My cousin had one time stated, "Fix your damn teeth, carnival game-looking ass." And I just know I'm going to get incels clambering into my comments accusing me of being attracted to Ramirez despite him being, well, evil. And don't bring up the dark triad in the comments. It's outdated and it's akin to Sigmund Freud. This is no place for that. I'm just a cartoonist that likes true crime. That's all there is. This character design was a bit of a challenge, and I didn't know what to do with him until I realized he could be an enemy of my magical girl character, Natasha Maruyama. And this character that was inspired by Richard Ramirez would be a challenge for Natasha to battle. He'd feel he and Natasha are somehow intertwined due to the connections of Satanism. However, Natasha intends to use her demonic powers to help people, whilst Ramirez uses his to take advantage and cause pain to those around him, much like his real-life counterpart. I do intend to change this guy's name. I'll keep Ramirez as a last name as a jumping-off point, but Richard has got to go. I found the name Enzo, which means home ruler. Enzo Ramirez. Anyway, that is all for this episode of True Crime Character Design. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment if you can, and subscribe. And have a great day.